In this video, we're going to go through the photography and the retouching for this picture. Okay, so before we dive into everything, I just want to let you know about this. The Photoshop Virtual Summit 4. Now this is a free online Photoshop training event that runs for 5 days from May the 2nd through May the 6th, 2022, with 40 Photoshop classes from 20 instructors and over 30 hours of video tutorials from folks such as 𝗟𝐿 from Flern, Jesus Ramirez from the Photoshop Training Channel, Photoshop Hall of Famers Dave Cross and Matt Kloskowski, Hollywood movie poster retoucher Lisa Carney, yours truly, and more. Now this is the link to go and get a free pass available from the 1st of April, and I've also included that in the description. Right, let's get on with the video. Now yes, you could say this is a bit of a cliche shot. It's one that's been done many times in the past and it will be done many times again in the future. But it was my first time. In fact, it was the first time I'd ever done a 30-second long exposure, and it was great fun to do. Now I'm going to quickly go through how I actually photographed that long exposure. But if you know this stuff already and you just want to have a look at the retouching that I did in Lightroom and Photoshop, just click forward to jump to the next chapter, or click on the next chapter in the description. Now this photo was taken at a great place called 𝗓𝗏 in Devon, and once I'd chosen my spot, it was then a case of first of all taking a properly exposed photograph. I was using my Sony a7R IV and the Sony 16-35mm G Master lens. So using manual, I went for an aperture of f11 to give plenty of depth of field, an ISO of 100, and then dialed in the shutter speed and took a few shots. This meant I had a perfectly exposed photograph and was able to pretty much freeze movement in the Seagulls. You'll see why in the retouching part. Now I knew that I wanted to use a 30-second exposure or thereabouts to completely flatten out the sea and create that smooth, misty kind of look. So I used a 10-stop neutral density filter. If you're interested, the filters I used are made by H&Y, and the main reason for that is because they're magnetic, which makes them quick and convenient to use. Attaching something like a neutral density filter is easy. The magnets are strong and you can secure them. The 10-stop I use is circular and just slides into the holder attached to the front of the camera. Now this is why I love using mirrorless, because it really is a case of what you see is what you get. When I put the filter in place, everything goes dark. So all I need to do is to then change the shutter speed by 10 stops, basically slowing the camera down to bring the exposure back to what it was originally in the perfectly exposed shot where I froze everything. Now this took it down to a 30-second exposure, and being mirrorless meant I could then focus and take the shot using a 2-second timer. Now the sea was occasionally coming up onto the beach around the tripod, but as it was an outgoing tide, it was hardly anything, so no problem with it disturbing the tripod and causing movement, because I'd also pushed it into the sand. So out of camera, here are a couple of the faster shutter speed photographs, and here's the 30-second long exposure. Now let's run through the retouching. Okay, so starting off then in Lightroom, here are the 3 images that I'm going to use to create the final retouch picture. The first 2 contain the frozen seagulls and sea, and then that final image is the 30-second long exposure. Looking at each of these images though, the exposure does seem to be a little bit darker than I'd like, so I'm going to come to the basics panel and just increase the exposure slider to around about +1. I need to make sure that those other 2 images have exactly the same setting, so all I will do is hold down the Shift key, click on the far right image so they're now all highlighted, and then come over to the Sync button. Make sure that there's ticks and all the checkboxes there, and just click Synchronize. So now that exposure is the same across each of the images. Now what I want to do is start off by blending the seagulls into the 30-second long exposure picture. So I need to go to Photoshop. So we'll go to Photo, Edit in, Open as Layers in Photoshop. This will send all 3 images over into Photoshop and keep them in the same working tab, one above the other, in the layer stack. Once it's done that, all I need to do is to make sure that the very bottom layer is the 30-second long exposure and the ones above it are the ones that contain the seagulls. Now I'm going to turn off the middle layer and I'll just concentrate on the uppermost layer at the moment. I'm then going to get my lasso tool and make very loose selections around the seagulls that I want to bring into this picture. Once I've made one selection, I need to hold down the Shift key so that every other selection I make is added as well. So we'll just come down here like so, and we'll include all these ones at the bottom, around here, and these two here. When I've got that, I'll hold down the Command key on Mac, Control key on Windows, and press J to cut those selections out up onto their own layer. And you can see here now, if I turn every other layer off, there are those seagulls. And in fact, now that I've done that, I don't need what was that original upper layer because I've got the seagulls off it, which is what I want. Next thing we'll do, we'll turn that one off and we'll turn on the middle layer, making sure that we're active on it in the layer stack. Again, I'll get my lasso tool and make a very loose selection around the seagulls that I want to bring in. So we'll just do this, making sure I hold down that Shift key so that every time I make a selection, it also adds it in. So something like that, and this little loose one over here. And again, press down that Command key on Mac, Control key on Windows, and press J to put those selected areas up onto their own layer, like we can see just here. And now we don't need the main image that included those seagulls. So now if I turn both of these uppermost layers on, these are the seagulls that we've got. We can see the original sky around them. To make life easy now to blend them in, I'm actually going to merge these two layers together. So with the uppermost one highlighted, I'll hold down the Shift key, highlight the very bottom one, and then I'll just come to the flyout menu in the top right hand corner of the layers panel, and I'll put Merge Layers. That then puts both of those layers into one, and I'll rename that one to Birds. Now to blend them in is really, really simple. All I need to do is come to the right hand side of where the name is that I've called this layer, called Birds, put my cursor to the right hand side of it and just double click. That will then open up the layer style properties. You could also come to the very, very bottom of the layers panel, click on the layer effects icon and choose blending options. That will bring up exactly the same. Now to get rid of the sky around the seagulls, all we need to do is come to the blend if options where it says blend if. I'm going to change that to blue, and we only want to affect this layer, the layer containing the seagulls. So this is the one we're going to use, this gradient here. Over the right hand side is where we have the predominant blue. So all I need to do is click and drag this slider over to the left hand side. And as I drag that, keep an eye on what's happening to the seagulls. You'll start to see that the actual blue sky around them starts to disappear. Now when we do this, what you might find is that the area around the actual birds is a little bit rough. So to smooth that out a bit, what we can do is come back to the blend if slider where we have the marker that we've originally moved. We can hold down the Option key on Mac, Alt key on Windows, click on that little marker to split it in two, just to soften down the blend around the seagulls. Now what you'll notice is, can you see how we're starting to see a little bit of that sky coming in? So we need to be careful how much we move these so that we don't bring back too much of that sky. Now this is why I actually made the selections of the birds individually as opposed to leaving lots of the original picture in. It's just so I can tweak it and soften that selection round. That would have been a lot harder to do if I'd included more sky around the seagulls. So now that that's done, we'll just click OK. That's looking good. And what I also want to do is just add a little bit more movement on these seagulls. I don't want them to be too frozen in time. So we'll just apply a little bit of blur. I'll go to the filter menu. We'll convert for smart filters to give that flexibility of making changes to the settings if we want that. We can see now we've got the smart object icon in the bottom right hand corner of that layer. Then we'll go to the filter menu, choose blur, and I think I'll just try a little bit of motion blur, only a small amount. We can change the angle that we want that blur to be. I'll just bring it so it's coming down across this kind of angle. And the distance, we can see if we bring it up too much, that's a bit too blurry. Only needs to be a little bit. And I'm going to probably keep it around about the 5 or 6 mark, then click OK. Now there are some dust spots and a few other little things I need to tidy up in this image. And I could do that in Lightroom using the healing and clone brush. But it's so bad at the time I'm recording this, we'll just do it in Photoshop. So what we'll do is just add a new blank layer. I'll call this one Clean Up. And then maybe I'll get something like the clone stamp tool and just do a very, very quick job just removing that seagull from the picture just there. Now I'll just fast forward while I go around the image as well, removing some of the dust spots that we've got on the sensor using something like the Spot Healing Brush. Okay, now that's done, let's just go to the File menu, choose Save to send this now back over into Lightroom. And over in Lightroom, here is our image. The next thing I'll do is just very quickly straighten this up. So we'll go to the Crop tool, click on this ruler icon here. Very, very easy to do. We'll just put it on the horizon line there, click on one side, drag it out, put it a little bit further away, and then release. It'll then straighten the image and press Enter or Return. Now looking at it, there isn't that much to do with this image, but I definitely want to brighten up the pier to give it much more impact. So what I'll do is then I'll come to the basics here. Let's just increase that shadow slider to bring a little bit more detail into the picture, especially on the underside of the pier. So around about plus 65, something like that will work well. And now I want to give the pier a lot more punch. And this is where that new masking can really come in Lightroom. So let's just click on the masking tab and we'll choose the select subject to see if that's what it selects for us. So we'll click on it, see what it does. And the red overlay now shows what it's selected. We only want the top part. We don't want the bottom part here selected. So now that we've got this mask, let's click on Subtract and then Brush, making sure that the feather isn't completely soft. We'll bring that down a little bit, density and flow at 100, and I'll just very quickly brush this off the lower part of the pier where we don't want to affect with the brightness that we're going to go bring into the picture now. So let's just quickly bring all this off, just there. Cool, that's looking good. We can leave some of that on the underside of the pier for definite because that's going to really enhance the detail. Now that we've got that, let's just bring up the exposure. And you can see straight away that really does bring that pier to life, which is good. And we can enhance that even further by using the clarity and texture sliders. So let's just bring up the clarity. You can see there when we bring it up and down, you can see how much more impact that gives. So we don't want to take it too far because we don't want to introduce any halos. But certainly around about the 30 mark is enough. And some of that fine contrast, the fine detail we can increase as well with that texture slider. So let's bring up, that's maybe half of what we did with the clarity. Something like that is looking good. I think what we'll also do is just brighten up the blue of the sea and try to get rid of a little bit of this darker part of the sky up here. I'm not too keen on that gradient, so we could maybe do that by going to the HSL color tab, and I'm going to choose the blues here and then just bring up the luminance. And you can see now as I do that, it's brightening up both the sky and the sea, the blue values there. That's looking pretty good. Maybe try the cyans as well. Let's just bring that to around about there. Now the next thing we'll do is give this a bit of a crop. So I'm going to go for a 16:9 aspect on it. So we click on the crop tool, click on original, choose 16:9, and then we can just drag this in from the bottom to around about, say, there, trying to stick with the rule of thirds. Let's have the horizon line on this first third. So if I drag that down, so we're kind of looking around about that area there. Maybe something like that will work just there. Then press enter or return to commit that. Now the next thing I want to do to this image is do a black and white conversion. So we'll go back to the basics tab and I'll click on black and white. Here now in the profile section it says monochrome, and if I just clicked on those arrows to the side of that, we have browse, and now I can put my cursor over each of these profiles that are built into Lightroom, and as I do that in real time you'll see how they actually affect the overall image. Now if I scroll down there's lots more here to choose from, but actually the one that I really like is black and white 01. So I'm going to click on that, then click close, and I can then dive in if I scroll further down to the black and white section, so I can now come in and start to play around with these to see how they'll affect the black and white conversion. And I'm just going to bring up the orange slider a little bit more because you can see how that's bringing the pier to life even more across the wooden paneling and the underside just there. So we'll bring that up to around about, say, there, maybe the yellows as well, see what that does. That just does a little bit there. That's looking good. We'll close that down. Then the last couple of things I like to do here is we'll go to the detail tab and apply a little bit of sharpening. So I'm going to take the sharpening quite high on this one to around about 40. To control where it is, I'll just hold down the Option key on Mac, Alt key on Windows, click on the masking slider, and then move it over to the right-hand side. And then the very last thing I think I'll do is go to the effects panel. Let's just zoom in on the image, and I'll apply just a little bit of grain as well, somewhere around about 15, making sure the size is quite good as well, say 30, and leave the roughness at 50. Now let's just zoom out and press F to go to full screen. Now I'm really happy how this has turned out, especially now that I've printed it. And on that topic, this was printed on my Canon ImagePrograph Pro 300, the one behind me, and the paper is Permajet Titanium Gloss 300. I do get quite a few questions on that, but I just thought it'd be great to show you the process from start to finish. So if you found any of this useful, and you may well give it a go in the future, I'd really appreciate a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, click on that subscribe button, because that's just a great free way that you can support this channel. It may be a small thing, but it really does make a big difference. But for this video, that's me. I'm done. I'll see you in the next one.